Hi, and welcome to Connecting on the Move, Kids, Podcasts, and Cars. I'm Sanden, editor of Brains On, an award-winning science podcast where every episode we answer questions from kids.
Hi, I'm Marc Sanchez, one of the producers of Brains On. Molly, it looks like you're on mute. Is your camera off? Are you there?
Hey, Marc. Hey, Sanden. I'm so sorry. It's been a day. My dog Honeybee knocked off the cookies I made for the team onto the floor. I'm gonna make new ones. And then Lulu forgot her water bottle, so I'm running her back to school. And I'm running a bit late. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Everyone, that's Molly Bloom, our host. Molly, do you need a little bit of time here?
I'm getting out of my car right now. Can we play the intro? I'll be ready. Bye.
All right. Bye, Molly. See you soon.
Okay. Well, roll the intro.
You're listening to Brains On, where we're serious about being curious.
Brains On is supported in part by a grant from the National Science Foundation.
Phew. Okay. Take two, guys. You ready?
Yes, thank you all for your patience. Car rides can be tricky with kids. Sometimes getting places is just a heads down, get from point A to point B.
Well, that's actually why we're here today. We'd like to show you how being in the car with your kids is also an opportunity. If you have questions that come up as we go, feel free to put them in the chat anytime, and we'll circle back to them at the end.
We are all parents, and we know that sometimes it's a struggle to be in the car with kids. It feels like anytime you get in a car, there are a few ways it can go. You'll probably recognize these.
On the left, there's the free-for-all method.
That one looks familiar. Just trying to get there in one piece.
Just to the right is another method we've all probably used. Give each kid a device. You gain silence, but everyone disappears.
Moving on down the line, some vehicles will let you do the put on a movie method. That way you can play DVDs for everyone.
Everyone but you as the parents. They watch and you listen.
That's right. It'll let you have some calm, but it won't really let you connect.
And that's where the last one comes in, the listening together method. Specifically listening to podcasts. Specifically listening to podcasts that everyone in the car will enjoy.
This is where we think there's a huge opportunity, not just to make your car rides easier, but also better, because you and your kids interact together in a way that may not always be possible in other listening environments or with any other media.
A few years ago, we joined with the Science Museum of Minnesota to research how kids and families listen to episodes of Brains On together. And we found that a lot of families listen in the car.
Yeah, it turns out the car is a super unique space that allows for special interactions with your kids. Plus, it's a great place to learn about science, technology, engineering, and math.
We wanted to better understand what was happening in the car and how we could make shows that are even more useful in that environment. And we wanted to know, how can parents engage with their kids during this time? And how can parents get kids to engage with science?
So again, we joined up with the Science Museum of Minnesota, who got a grant from the National Science Foundation, part of whose mission is to get kids interested in the world of science. And as they say, quote, ready to solve pressing global challenges in science and engineering.
The Science Museum conducted a really cool research study of families in the car environment. And the museum's director of evaluation and research and in learning, Dr. Amy Grack-Nelson, is here to tell us more.
We could think of this study as groundbreaking in terms of thinking about how families learn together and as a learning space. We haven't really studied this in terms of how the car environment can be a place for learning. And so for us to be cameras in the car, no one has done this. And so this is the first time that National Science Foundation has funded a study of this kind. And we wanted families to be as natural as they could be, because we wanted to make sure what we were getting was natural behaviors of families listening together. So we put GoPro cameras in families' cars, and one right behind their rearview mirror and another one in the back seat, so we could get people when there's people in the front and people in the back. And then we had wireless microphones that we put on their seatbelt. So when I think about like the big learnings from this study and the big kind of ahas that we had from it. I mean, there's so many things that we learned that have been so exciting. I mean, one was just trying to understand, like, what is it about this car environment that's so unique? You're sitting in your car together and you're buckled in and you're kind of stuck. You can't go anywhere. So that encourages you to pay attention to each other and to have this space and time together where you're looking for something to do. Parents and families are looking for something to pass that time together. Another big aha is that a lot of times people think about podcasts as you listen by yourself. And you don't really think about them as a facilitator of conversations, to spark conversations. And so we learned a lot about like the design of Brains On and how parents are using pieces of Brains On and kids. And what I think was really interesting is that kids were interacting with Brains On just as much as parents. And from that, these conversations emerged, and you saw parents scaffold children's learning, and like I think how parents are noticing things and calling them out to children and engaging in these conversations, but children were doing it just as much. Because Brains On is built on children's questions, that's really engaging to children, and we saw that a lot where kids would respond to the questions that are on the podcast. In science, we want kids to have that curiosity and to ask questions, and that's such an important science skill, is asking questions. And as parents, to be able to help build that skill, and Brains On helps kids build that skill, and parents can use Brains On in that way. And so what happens is we see that Brains On is, when in the car, is also helping to facilitate conversations as though they're another person in the car with them. So you have both Brains On and parents in the car helping to facilitate children's learning in this vehicle space.
Thank you, Amy, and a special thank you to the Brains On families that participated in our research project. You know who you are. They helped us uncover some important ways that children's podcasts can spark interest and engagement in STEM. We met these amazing families in California, in Los Angeles, Lancaster, Rolling Hills, Pasadena, Arcadia, Buena Park, San Gabriel, Irvine, Woodland Hills, and Santa Monica, and in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Excelsior, Alexandria, Duluth, Minnetonka, Mendota Heights, Roseville, Eden Prairie, Edina, Buffalo, Northfield, Inver Grove Heights, Sartell, New Prague, and Chanhassen. Thank you so much.
And remember, if you have any questions as we go along explaining all this information, please put them in the chat. We'll get to them at the end. Now, as we mentioned, parents are a kid's first educators. So you're teaching your child every time you interact with them. And we know that a lot of you are probably already using our show to educate and inspire. That's great. And we're going to walk you through some examples of what we learned in this study, and we'll offer ideas for how you as a parent can engage even more with your kids and encourage more science learning in the car.
So for this first example, we've got a great way to kick off in-car engagement. It's a segment that Brains On listeners and fans might be familiar with. It's called the Mystery Sound. So each episode, we play a sound that a kid sends in to us. Then we ask our kid co-host to guess what it is by the end of the episode. We purposely built moments like this into the show where you can engage with your kids. It's a great time to pause the episode if you want and let everybody in the car have a guess. Even you. You can do it while driving. So great, in fact, that we're going to try to guess one right now.
Mystery sound.
Today's mystery sound comes from Kellen from Reno, Nevada. Okay, let's get some guesses. Mark, you're first.
I mean, to me, it sounds like, you know, if you're like Wile E. Coyote and you put roller skates on and then you like light the rocket on your back, and then you kind of like go down a hill and then jump off. That's pretty much what it sounds like. So something taking off is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Something taking off.
A long way to get to that. Yeah. I thought
I'm
something
not
taking
known
off
for my
too.
short answers.
It sounded like something taken off. I thought maybe like it sounded too small to be like a real big airplane, but I thought maybe like one of those little model airplanes taking off from like a little model runway with like, they're serving little model tomato juices on and everything. Maybe like a tiny version.
Okay. I'm going to guess a vacuum. It sounded like a vacuum to me, sucking stuff out of the carpet. I spill things all the time. Very familiar with that sound. Probably wrong. Should we hear it again?
Yeah, let's hear it one more
Sure.
time.
And feel free to sound off in the chat if you have a guess.
Is it coming? There it is. Okay, so keep that sound in mind. We're going to find out what it is at the end of the webinar, so stick around.
So guessing
All
the
right.
mystery sound is a perfect example of something families can do together in the car. And if you are engaged with the show, it will help your kids engage as well. It's a fun segment to help focus their attention, and your enthusiasm will get them involved. Observing the world around us is a huge skill in science, and learning to listen to something like the mystery sound and hypothesize what it might be is a great way to reinforce that skill.
Another way to get kids engaged is to talk out loud. So our show is full of questions and prompts. In our study, we found that when families responded to those questions and prompts out loud, it led to great discussions. So talking out loud while a podcast is playing, I know sometimes it can feel a little awkward, like you're kind of interrupting us or being rude, but we're not there in the car, we're not hearing it. And actually, we built our show full of moments where it's easy to pause or just start your own side conversation.
Plus, you can and should let your kids listen to the episode again and again and again and again. As you've noticed, your kids are enthusiastic about repetition. Same thing goes for podcasts as it does with all the videos that they watch over and over again. That repetition is actually very good for the brain, for brain development. And it allows you to pick up on new things each time you listen, especially if you talk them through it on the first time around.
There are two more great moments to start a conversation with your kids about the podcast. And those are right before and right after you all listen together. So our episode titles, they're really clear about what's going to be in the episode. They're usually a question. So it's really easy to just use that as a starting point for discussion. You can ask your kid, why do you think salt makes food taste so good? Or, what do you know about how paper is made? Then you can start a discussion from that, hear what they have to say, ask them if it's a question they've ever thought about or if it's new to them, maybe have them predict the answer. That's going to help them start out the listening experience already invested and engaged. Then you can debrief about it afterwards too. So did they learn what they expected? What surprised them? What were their favorite parts? What's the coolest thing they learned? All of this is a great opportunity to reinforce what you learned, to kind of build excitement about the show, and to bond around the whole listening experience.
One of the things we feel passionately about at Brains On is giving kids the tools to evaluate information and trust experts. In a world of disinformation and distrust of science, especially, it can be tough to know how to evaluate the people who are talking, but it's a critical skill. That's why we talk to experts, like scientists working in their field, people who are conducting the experiments. It's why we highlight the work they've done, the things they've published, or the places they teach. You can build on this by talking with your kids about how you know to trust them. Do they have experience with the subject? Have they worked with the data? Do they offer context to try and foster any sort of understanding? We also think that hearing from scientists humanizes them for kids. Their jobs aren't so abstract, or their jobs can be kind of abstract, so the work that they're doing becomes more approachable if you hear them. It's hard not to be excited, honestly, about a subject when you hear an expert talk about it with a passion. Their enthusiasm about what they do, the mind-blowing facts they share, and their personal stories, they become infectious. And connecting your kids to that enthusiasm goes a long way towards building their trust in experts and information literacy. Of course, the best thing you can do is to just listen. Playing an episode in the car is a great first step.
So let's talk about some strategies for how to engage with a podcast when listening to it with your kids. Through our research, we learned that there are a few things that make a big difference while you're in a car together.
Right. We know that a lot of the scientific process is about asking questions. And like we mentioned, our whole show is based on asking questions. Every episode starts with a question from a kid. Our host, our co host, and even the funny characters in the skits, they all ask questions constantly. We do everything we can to put a bunch of question marks all throughout every episode. And you could think of each one of those questions as an opportunity to pose that same question to the people you're listening with. So when you ask the questions of others in the car, or you direct attention to the question by kind of repeating it out loud after you hear it in the podcast, you're actually encouraging engagement and curiosity. You're taking that information out of the speakers and sort of into the air around the kids and the family and getting them thinking about it, engaging with it. Plus, it's a great way to get everybody talking and sharing what they know and what they're thinking and feeling.
And you don't have to wait for us to pose a question in the show. We found that parents who come up with their own questions while they listen are doing great work to support knowledge building. Even simple questions like, do you know what that word they said means? Or have you ever seen a picture of the animal that they're describing? Checking in like this helps you know when your kids might be a little lost, and it gives you a chance to help build their understanding. This is especially important if you've got a range of ages in the car, like siblings.
Mm-hmm. Or instead of questions, why not share what you already know about the topic at hand? Maybe your family has some relevant experience. Maybe you went to a water park last summer. So when the podcast is talking about the experience of having your head underwater, you can say, hey, do you remember when we went to Super Splash Zone? Being able to connect your kids personally to what they're hearing really helps them see themselves in the show. And it helps them connect to the topic. Plus, it can spark family conversations that bring up memories or familiar stories. All of this extends the family learning.
One great place to look for this is when I'm getting to know the kid co-host. So in every episode, I usually interview our co-host about their ideas and experiences, often related to the topic. And in our research, we found that 75% of families interacted with each other during this part of the show. So they would make personal connections to what the kid co-host was saying, or they would point out what they know about the topic that we're talking about. And we love these moments in the show because they show that kids have expertise too, and that their ideas and experiences matter a lot. And beyond connecting to personal experiences, you know your child best. So you can notice things in an episode that you know are of interest to them. So this can also facilitate more conversation and help reinforce interests that they already have.
So here's a big question. Should you pause the episode to do all this talking? Great question. And the answer really depends on your family and what's happening. There's no right or wrong way to do it. We saw some families who did that, some who didn't. They did all kinds of things in the study. So all of it seems to be working. But, important safety note, your first concern should always be safety. So if you have to take your eyes off the road to find the pause button, don't do it. Not worth it. But if you have a passenger who can sort of take on that responsibility, kind of be the pause master in chief or whatever, perfect. Deputize them to pause and whenever and let the conversations just fly. But if you can't pause right now, all three of us give you full permission to talk over us. It's fine. We love to hear that conversations are happening. We won't be offended. And you can always rewind later, or you can just re-listen to the episode. But if that feels weird to you, or it's kind of hard to talk over us because, we're just so engaging, well, you can always talk after the episode ends and just debrief. We've said it before, though, the mystery sound, that is a perfect time to stop the episode and check in with everyone in the car. What do they think it is? Does it sound organic, metallic, squishy, repetitive? What are they hearing? What are their guesses? Speaking of which, Molly, I'm still thinking about that mystery sound that we've had today. Maybe we could pause our talk and hear it again?
Yes, great idea. So to remind ourselves, here is the mystery sound again. Okay. So this is that moment of pause that Sanden was said before, and we have some people in the chat who are saying their guesses. So Courtney said it sounds like a car in the rain. Pearl,
yeah, that would go really well with the
skateboard.
theme of this talk.
True. Yeah, someone thought a skateboard passing by. Bridget thought wind. Hans thinks marbles running down a track. Sanden, do you have new ideas?
No. I mean, I kind of remember those little lawnmower popper toys? Maybe but without the
yeah.
popping. Maybe it kind of gave me that vibe. I don't know, like a little toy lawnmower.
Yes. I'm sticking with vacuum. I guess you and I are on the same wavelength. Something you have to push on the ground. Should we see if we're right?
Yes. Oh, I gotta know.
Okay. Here's the answer.
Hi, my name is Kellen, and I'm from Reno, Nevada. That was the sound of my Santa Fe Super Chief toy train.
I feel like I should have got that. I have a 4-year-old who's obsessed with trains, and I definitely I get it. I hear it now. It sounds like a toy train for sure.
Toy train. That's good. That was tricky. None of us got it right. See, these mystery sounds so tricky. So it's always good to have a little chat. And a thing we do on the show sometimes is try to have the silliest guesses possible. And that's always a fun creative activity too.
Being wrong is a great way to encourage your kids that it's okay to guess even when you don't know. So if you're like intentionally being very wrong about your guesses, that may make it feel safer for someone who doesn't like being wrong to sort of chime in and, make a slightly more accurate guess. And I think it's worth pointing out that while our research found that the car is a great environment for this interaction, a lot of what we're talking about, this can work outside of the car as well. So maybe you're going to listen in the living room or while you're cooking dinner, or maybe your kid listens on their own and you check in afterwards. So however you do it, don't be afraid to start talking about what you're hearing and asking your kids questions about the content. And if you want guides on how to get more out of every episode, questions to ask, activities, we've got a bunch of free resources, all designed by teachers. Find that at brainson.org/learn.
There are lesson plans by topic areas on that educator page, or you can find them by clicking on any individual episode on our website. You can use these to dive deeper into subjects and get ideas for activities to do together that build on what you heard. There are also worksheets and scorecards for our debate show, and something we call the KLW worksheet. Maybe you've heard of these worksheets. So your kids can fill out the K, stands for what they know. The W is what they want to know before they listen to the episode. And then they fill out the L, what they learned, and their favorite quote while they're listening. And beyond documenting what they learn, you can brainstorm with them on other ways to build on what they heard using their own creativity. Have them draw a picture of their favorite character, come up with a question of their own they think would make a great episode, have them think about sounds that are interesting. You can record them and submit them as a mystery sound. Our show is fueled completely by the suggestions and topics we get from kids. We do not do an episode unless a kid has sent in a question about it. So when you're ready, send us your questions, your drawings, and your mystery sounds. Here's how to do it.
Hey there, champ. Did you just finish listening to an episode of Brains On? Fun! Did listening give you an idea that you want to share with the team? Great! But how are you going to do that? Whoa, I'm not sure that's going to work. That's a little better, but you know what? There's an even faster way. Now you're cooking. First, grab an adult and have them help you head over to brainson.org. If you've got a burning question for the team, something you've always wanted to know that you think they can answer, click on the Contact button. You'll find 2 buttons on this page. The one on the right is the easiest way to get us a question. Simply type in what you want to know. Don't forget to tell us your name and how old you are. If you're interested in sending us a mystery sound that you recorded, or maybe some art that you made, use the other button on the Contact page. This will let you upload a file from your computer, like a photo of your art. Don't forget to tell us your name, where you're from, and what your mystery sound was, so that we can use your sound and your voice on the podcast. Now all you need to do is get out your crayons, glitter, charcoal, glue, nails, and other tools, and get drawing. Hang on there, parents. Before you log off, did you know that the Brains On team creates lesson plans for most episodes? That's right. You can use them to help with ideas on how to engage your kids with what they are hearing. From brainson.org, you can click on the Educators button in the menu. This will help you find all our educational resources, like the Educator newsletter, episode response sheets, and curiosity kits full of activities. You'll also find a list of all of our lesson plans, divided by every show and topic area. Just click on a topic, pick your episode, and you'll find a lesson plan right in the episode description. Contained in this are question prompts, crafting ideas, and additional learning resources. Aha! So there you go. Remember to visit brainson.org to tell us what you think, send us your artwork, and access resources to expand your experience of listening.
So now that we've covered some of the strategies that we found in our research, we had some questions more generally about how kids are engaging with media. There are a lot of stories out there about the risks of media for kids, but what is the reality? What are kids consuming, and what does that mean for them? To help us understand, we talked with Amanda Lenhart, who is a senior fellow at the Joan Gans Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop. Amanda was previously a senior researcher at Common Sense Media and has worked for 20 years researching the media habits of children with Pew Internet and American Life Project and the nonprofit data research group Data and Society. Her research focuses primarily on children, teens, and families and how young people interact with the internet and technology. Hello. So, Amanda, thank you so much for being here. We really, really appreciate it. So, you have looked into podcasts particularly, and I'm just wondering, what benefits have you seen for kids listening to podcasts?
Well, so the research that I've done has been more about just kids listening to podcasts at all. And we see that with kids, the podcasting really ramps up as kids get older. So younger kids are often listening to stories. Actually, very young children, like children under 2, actually listen to a little bit more podcasts than kids do kind of once they can start to move. But then we really see it something that takes off in the teen years, where a little bit less than half of teenagers have listened to a podcast. It's storytelling, imaginative, learning oriented, but also it doesn't have you looking at a screen often.
What differences do you see for kids' media experiences when they're listening to a podcast versus watching something on a screen?
In some ways, I think some of the differences between, if we're like talking about reading versus listening versus viewing, there's an imaginative element to it, right? You have to paint the pictures in your mind when you're listening, as opposed to having somebody paint the pictures for you when you're watching. Reading in some ways is similar to that. Unless there's pictures that accompany the text, you have to paint the picture, right? We've all had the experience of like reading the book and then going to see the movie and being like, wait, I would not have cast her as that character, right? And so I do think it does allow for more kind of, as I said, imaginative and sort of expansive thinking.
Really cool. And is there a difference then that you see between reading and listening, or are those kind of similar?
I think those are different, right? You don't have to be a reader to listen. So for a lot of younger children who don't yet know how to read or are developing readers, listening can be a real gateway to hearing stories, right? This is how we shared information for millennia, right? Before we figured out how to write and before we really started writing things down in books and keeping books around and making books available to people who weren't super rich, we told stories to each other. We sang to stories to each other too. And so I think in some ways it gets back to how we've always shared information. And so I think that obviously there's lots of great research that talks about like what it means to read something versus listen versus watch. And they each occupy an important part of how we learn and gather information.
So in the study, we are talking a lot about joint media engagement, where parents and kids are engaging with something together. I'm just wondering, from the work that you've done, like, why is that something that parents should care about engaging with media with their kids?
I mean, I think with very young children, there's good research that engaging with media with your children helps you to scaffold the child into understanding what they're seeing and learning from it. Oh, did you see this over here? Parents can help narrate and help children navigate things as they can learn as they watch or as they listen. It also helps for, explanatory, like, oh, as children get older, do you want to talk about that thing that you watched? Or as you're watching something and you see something potentially problematic. Like, oh, hey, what did you think about that? And it becomes another way for us to teach and incorporate learning and value transmission into sort of everyday experiences. And it also just frankly can build closeness, right? A sort of a shared experience that we have as parents, which I think is easier to come by when kids are younger and gets harder and harder as they get older.
And so when kids listen to podcasts with their parents, is there anything particular there that might be different than watching a show together?
One of the things I think we might talk about is about cars, right? Like there's a sort of a long history, particularly in sort of psychology and talking about in parenting around how the value of the car, the value of a place where you don't have to look at each other, but you are talking about something. And I think podcasts play into that particular space, right? It's something that you're listening to, but you don't have to look at each other and you don't have to look at something specific unless you're driving, in which case, please look at the road. And it's an opportunity, I think, to engage and listen, but also talk. Some folks I know who have their own podcasts who talk about their listeners, often listening to even parenting podcasts with their children and with their adolescents as a way of sparking conversations that they otherwise don't really know how to have with their kids. But also even just the pure joy of listening to a story together. I know when my own children were younger, we did that on car trips, whether it was a story or a podcast, and just the fun of listening to stories together is different than watching something, and certainly different than reading aloud together or reading the same books and talking about them.
What advice do you have for parents who want to engage with their kids around media and maybe are a little unsure how to do it?
I would say, try to find the common ground of the things that you both enjoy, right? As parents, we've all had to do the things that we don't love. It might be a different age that is easier for you as a parent or a different activity, but finding the common ground, the thing that you both love. Maybe you're both huge fans of baseball, and listening to a sport podcast together might be a great way to kind of connect over that love of that sport.
So there's, a lot of concerns about the risks of media for kids. And I'm just wondering, what are some of the benefits of how kids can interact with media?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much possibilities for learning and exploration of ideas that are interesting to you and concepts that excite you, right? Like we all have had the kid that has a particular specific love and could devour, season after season of a podcast on that topic, of any media on that topic. Your kid that loves tigers and wants to watch documentaries about tigers, right? So I think there's that opportunity for sort of interest-driven enjoyment that is powerful.
Amanda, thank you so much for being here. We really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. My pleasure.
Wow, Amanda had such good advice there. And we also have a short guide coming. It's on our website, summarizing suggestions for parents. Some of the stuff we've talked about, some other things, linked to our research. You can go to brainson.org/research. That's brainson.org/research. And if you miss any of that, you can also, this video will be available again later. So just check into our YouTube channel, search Brains on Universe on YouTube. That's where you are right now. And you can watch and listen again. So if you, in case you haven't been able to tell by now, we love questions. And we'd love to answer some of your questions now. So if you have any follow-ups to what we talked about or anything else about our shows, you can drop your questions in the chat like people have been doing, and we'll do our best to get to them. And I think, Molly, you're going to be the question wrangler. Is that correct?
Definitely. So I'm going to start by introducing someone who's near and dear to us from the Science Museum of Minnesota, Evelyn Christian Ronning. She works in evaluation and research. She's the learning department manager at the Science Museum of Minnesota. We've worked with her for a long time, and she was really important in this research. And so there's a bunch of questions here that I think only you can answer. Marc, Sanden, and I can't really answer them. So we're going to start with you, Evelyn. So this question is from Bridget, and they want to know, does it depend what you saw on the kind of car people were in?
Great question. We saw I mean, the thing to think about here is that all families are very different in terms of how they interact, and that can be for any number of reasons. And so we saw interactions regardless of car type. We were in, we set up our equipment in the personal car of families. So we were in minivans, we were in sports cars, we were in sedans, we were in all of them. And so even if you had a situation where you had a minivan with like two separate seats going back. Even the kids in the back that were in the very, very far back could still interact with mom all the way up in the front. So
Very cool. Here's another question for you, Evelyn. Helen is curious about the ideal age range for kids that your findings would apply for, like I said, this joint media engagement.
well, I mean, I think we just heard from Amanda as well, talking about how podcast listening actually picks up more in the teen years. And while the limits of our study were certainly on kids ages 6 to 12, and I know that that's often a sweet spot for you all in terms of who you design for, we did have families have kids at all different times and spaces. And so we did have kids that were in the car that we considered to be part of the study who were in that 6 to 12 range. And we had kids that were younger than that because they were siblings. And so we were able to observe, those kinds of interactions between siblings. And then we also saw, of course, on the other end of that, kids that were 14, 15, 16 years old in the car with a 12-year-old. And I think what's really interesting to note about that is that those kids are having really interesting conversations with each other that are different from the interactions that they may be having together as a family. And so that sometimes the older children, the 15 and 16-year-old in the car, may be the go-to that a younger sibling might ask that question to, or answer a question of a younger sibling as well, and kind of serve in that role as teacher. And so it's a long way around of not answering the question, but saying that the podcast is designed in that 6 to 12 range. But we saw benefits and in terms of engaging families in conversation across the range of ages.
Yeah, we know there are lots of sibling groups that listen, and that some of them were in the study. So it's interesting how different ages will engage with the parents.
For sure.
I'm going to give you a little break, Evelyn. This one's for Sanden. When you said talk kids through the mystery sound, what do you mean by that? Like, what would you say?
Really good question. Yeah, I feel like a great way to do it is to sort of, sometimes it can take a little coaxing to get kids to sort of open up their answers. So you could get them and say, what do you think it is? And they may say, I don't know. Or you can start smaller and say, well, does it sound like something machine or does it sound like an animal? And that makes it a little easier for them to start making a guess. And then you could say, oh yeah, it does kind of sound like a machine. What else do you hear going on in the sound? What noises are you hearing? And then they could kind of describe, a little popping and a whooshing. Yeah, what makes a whooshing? What can we think of? So you can kind of sort of almost break it down piece by piece to sort of build up to getting an answer if they're a little reticent, or if they, asking them what they think it is feels like a big leap. Another one, like we said, is to just take some guesses yourself and say, what do you think? Could that be it? And then if they say no, they'll be like, oh yeah, you're right. But what are you hearing? What else? What do you think it might be? So that's some ways to talk them through it to get the kind of conversation rolling. If they're, not immediately jumping and raising their hand and saying, I know what it is, because that could also be the case.
Awesome. And remember, put your questions in the chat if you have them. We love to answer them. You can talk to Evelyn, who knows all about research, us about how we make the show, whatever you got. I have another one for you, Evelyn. This is from Cumber Kids. How frequently were you seeing parents pose their own questions versus saying questions that were posed by the episode?
So this is a kind of an emerging finding that we're working on presently. We have a research article that's going to come out about this. And I would say we're currently looking at the questions that are sparking or extending conversation. So we're seeing questions from our families happening in both of those different ways, where a question might start an interaction, or a question might come at a time that continues the interaction and keeps it going, the conversation in the car. And so out of all of those excerpts that we have from our data, we saw that and this is a little bit rough, but I saw the question in the chat, so I prepared for that. That we saw parents and caregivers relying on the podcast to mediate, and what I mean by that is you might, Molly, have asked a question, and the parent says, well, let's listen to the answer, or let's hear what the answer is there, or they might repeat the question, Molly, that you might ask a co-host or a child co-host, and they'll repeat it to the children in the car. And we also saw examples of people responding directly to Molly's question, as Amy Grack-Nelson, who spoke earlier, said, almost as if Brains On is another person in the car, and so responding as if they were the child co-host, or for example. And so we saw that happening about 25 to 30% of the excerpts that we have been looking at, where we would see not direct questioning being asked. And that's about as fine-tuned as I can get at this point.
Excellent. Marc, this one is for you. Do you have a suggestion for where and when families should try to listen to a podcast together when they're not in the car?
Ooh, when they're not in the car? I mean, I think a lot of us listen, as adults, we listen to podcasts, in their earbuds while we're cleaning or doing other things. But a good time is, I think, at dinner time, especially if you all want to, maybe if you're having trouble all coming together as a family, it'd be a good way to bring people together with, like, there's low stakes. You don't have to talk to each other if you don't want to. But it also, like everybody's been saying, and Evelyn was just talking about, it helps facilitate these questions, even if they're not questions at all about, or even if they start out as questions about the show, or kind of they help you facilitate a question, asking something of your kid. That's like cracking the door open, right? To talk to your kid about anything. And it's giving them the opportunity to know that their voice their voice matters, and that they're heard, and what they have to say is interesting, and you value that. So I think it's a great place to, dinner table is always a great place to talk anyway, but this can kind of help lessen the pressure on you or your kids to like come up with something.
Nice. Evelyn, I have a couple of related questions here. So I know as part of the study, you interviewed families as well, in addition to recording them in the car. And so we have a question here who says, is it okay to not have a lot of conversation during the episode? We don't talk much while we listen, so can we still get all the same benefits if we talk later and not as it's going on?
Absolutely. That's a really great question. And again, I just come back to that, families are all different in terms of their communication styles. I think what's most important, if there's a takeaway that you should get here, it's that whatever routine you set up is going to be the routine that's right for your family. So we had families who would do the typical, kind of NPR driveway moments where they would not talk a whole lot during the podcast, but they would sit in the car, in the garage, or wherever, as they and debrief the episode there. As much as we had people who would talk over the podcast and didn't feel bad about that, and then they would come in and out. They would pay attention and then go off and have a conversation and come back, and that was right for their family, as well as people who, as y'all mentioned earlier, would pause and not want to talk over the episode because that was somebody's preference. So I think, the real thing is about setting that routine for your family, and knowing that everybody's, going to engage in a way that makes sense for you.
I have another one for you, Evelyn. So how do you make sure that having cameras and microphones in the car did not change the behavior of the family, knowing they were being recorded?
Oh, that's an excellent question. We thought a lot about this, and we did do a pilot study as well. And one of the reasons, oftentimes, that social scientists like myself and our team here, Amy Grack Nelson and Elena Chakakis, just do a little name plug, are thinking really deeply about how the presence of cameras could potentially make the conversations that we then see very performative. And so our pilot study really helped us to smooth out some of those edges. One of the things that I would say we did, I think probably the most important thing, was we put an episode, a very brief episode of Smash Boom Best at the beginning. I'm sorry, Moment of Oh my gosh, I'm terrible. Moment of at the beginning. And so that was a segment that was roughly 3 to 5 minutes long. And then that was data that we essentially did not use. And since that happened at the beginning, then we have a chance to kind of get used to, the presence of the cameras and not being performative in that way. Maybe being performative at the beginning, but then kind of settling into the listening experience as the routine usually hits. The second thing that we did was we had different levels of participation. So we had a first round with our 32 families that participated, where they listened to one episode. And then we had a second phase where we had 4 families, and they had the car equipment. They set it up themselves whenever they listened. And they had it for between 2 and 3 weeks and set it up when they were going to listen and took it down when they weren't. And so it just, again, kind of became part of the routine. And what we were able to do there is sort of check what we were seeing in the first phase and check it against the second phase and see were we seeing different behaviors and how that was sort of playing out that way. So I think, having it be embedded in the family's car, the space that they're comfortable with, having it be part of their routine, and then having that brief episode of Moment of at the beginning was the ways that we controlled for that.
Awesome. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So we have a question here about shorter car rides. So our shows are about half an hour long. So maybe you have like a shorter ride to school or soccer practice. So the question does ask if we have shorter shows. So Moment of like Evelyn mentioned, is a shorter show if you want little kind of bites. But this person asks too, and I know, Evelyn, in the second phase of the study, you let people sort of go for longer, sort of choose when to listen. And I'm wondering if you saw people starting and stopping episodes over multiple car rides and if that made any difference.
We did not see that in terms of the data that we collected. They did kind of do the episodes in a continuous time, but we do know from all of the other kind of interview data, and also we had folks fill out a brief survey even at the beginning to participate. We do know that people do that. They do stop an episode, they'll listen for that brief 5 to 10 minutes, and then on the way to something, and then on the way back they'll pick it up again. And that seemed, again, to work really well for their families. And so I think regardless of like the length and the duration of the episode, what's important here is about centering and empowering kids through asking them questions about what's interesting to them, what they remember about experiences together, what they think about something. I mean, like that's what's key here. Not so much about the duration, but that you're all engaging together and that kids know that their voices are valued.
That's great.
Can I add one more thing, Molly?
Yeah.
I was going to say, Smash Boom Best, our debate podcast, is a great listen to for kind of a segmented trip or maybe a shorter trip, because it really comes in chunks that are, maybe 5 minutes long, and it's always the same every time. There's a format because it comes in rounds of, if you haven't heard it, different topics. So it'd be great. It's a great one to listen to for shorter trips.
Definitely. Sanden, I have a question for you. I know you did a lot of work on these. There's a question: what will the educator lesson plans help parents with when we're discussing the podcast with our kids?
Yeah, that's great. So The educated lesson plans, which I worked on, but they were designed by a teacher, focus on a lot of like things that kind of tie our episodes into Common Core curriculum, which is kind of the thing that all schools are supposed to build lessons around to sort of hit kids should know these certain ideas by these different ages. So you can find the lesson plan at the top of the page for each episode, and it'll have things like some questions to reflect like that you learned about the episode. So it'll say like, what is the water cycle, or name 2 things you could see with a microscope. But then it also pulls out some of the words from the episode that might be new or kind of slightly unfamiliar for kids and that are still important. And it'll have them listed there so you can try defining them or reading the definition of them if you don't know them. And there are a couple other little things there that just kind of reinforce what was in that episode. So, it's basically just like a little worksheet. It's not quite like game-like, so it's not like, puzzles and all that stuff, but it is a little more like a worksheet that you'd have like after to sort of show listening comprehension. So if you really want to make sure your kids are learning and maybe you're homeschooling or you're just doing like extra learning, these are a great tool to use. If you're a teacher, you can print them up and give them out, and kids can have the fun of listening to an episode in class and then doing this to show that they sort of comprehended what they wanted. But if you're a parent and you just want to like start conversations, you could sort of just look at these lesson plans and see some of the big questions we ask, and then just ask your kids that. You don't have to print them out or anything. I think you could just sort of, use that as a prompt for yourself to sort of start a discussion.
Awesome. Well, we made it through all of our Q&A questions. So I'm just going to ask you, Evelyn, our last question that we usually ask our interview guest, which is there anything else you want people to know about the study? Any takeaways that you want to mention that we didn't get to?
Well, I do. I think it's important for parents and caregivers to know that you don't have to be in the driver's seat. That you can take a back seat to your children, and that's actually really beneficial. Is when you can participate alongside and in a very equal kind of way to the learning process, and that sort of modeling, it goes a long way to, again, letting kids know that they can be empowered and their questions are as important as yours, and the things that they want to know are as important as what you have to teach them. And so I think that is one thing that I saw a lot amongst the families that participated, and I think is a really important thing as a parent myself to remember.
That's great. Oh, we just got a late breaking question from Shell Bell, which is kind of similar to what you were just talking about, which is when pausing to encourage asking questions or going down a rabbit hole, do you have suggestions on bringing it back to the podcast, or should we just let the kids lead and come back when the kids want to? What did you see in the study, Evelyn?
So we saw, oftentimes we did see, well, actually, I would say we saw both parents and caregivers and children sort of sense the natural ending of those paused conversations and say, well, let's get back and hear what they have to say. And so oftentimes with, like, say, a mystery sound, they would make multiple guesses. Everybody would go around 1, maybe 2 times, make guesses, say what they thought. And then, a parent might say, okay, well, let's see what the answer is, or let's see what the podcast says. But we also saw kids kind of, the conversation would happen, the pausing would happen, and either they had control of the device that the podcast was playing on, or they would say, let's get back to it. Let's listen to it again. And again, that request was honored, and they moved back in. So I think either way, but what I observed in that data was that the family found a kind of a natural end, and then to kind of refocus in on the podcast.
That is awesome. Well, yes. Those are all the questions that we have today. I just want to say thank you all for being here. If you want to find out more about our shows, you can go to brainson.org. We have 4 podcasts. You can also check out Smarty Pass to find out more about those. That's smartypass.org. And you can listen wherever you get your podcast to Moment of Brains On, Smash Room Best, Forever Ago. Huge thank you to the National Science Foundation, our friends at Science Museum of Minnesota. You guys have been amazing partners. And big thank you to our producer, Hans Butow, our engineer, Alex Simpson, our composer, Rachel Breeze, and our fearless leader, Beth Perlman. You can find all of this research, including content creator guides for those of you who make podcasts and the parent guide for those who want to find out more about engaging with their own kids. You can go to brainson.org/research. Thank you so much for being here. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.